Welcome to the Untitled Chapter. Thanks for watching today, and let's talk about Mega Man on the Game Boy. Now, there are 6 Mega Man games on the Game Boy, and you would think to yourself, well, there's 6 Mega Man games on the Game Boy, there's 6 Mega Man games on the NES, these must be the same games, just sort of toned down a little bit. And that's not the case at all. Yes, some of the bosses overlap a little bit, but they're actually mixed up in the Game Boy as far as like which numbers go with which ones on the NES. And also the level designs, they're totally different. The Dr. Wily stages, totally different. And even some of the bosses, they're only in the Game Boy games, they're not in the NES games. So I thought to myself, it might be fun for us to go through all 6 of the Mega Man games on the Game Boy and just break down each one of them and do a quick little review. So today's video is going to focus on the very first one, Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge. Now, Dr. Wily's Revenge is the first Mega Man game on the Game Boy, so it's going to be based somewhat on Mega Man 1, but a little bit different than that. And I mean by you're going to pull the 4 bosses, or at least 4 of the bosses from Mega Man 1 into this game, but you're also going to get some of the bosses from Mega Man 2 later on. But the 4 bosses you start off with are going to be Cutman, Iceman, Fireman, and Electman. And then just like in all the other Mega Man games, there's a best order to go through the bosses in, and so we're going to try to work through that as we go. So I started the game off with Fireman, and let me tell you, this is a real wake-up call when you load the game up in comparison to the NES game, because the NES game is actually pretty easy, and the Game Boy game, at least the level-wise, is incredibly difficult. The levels are significantly longer, there are fewer checkpoints in the levels, there's a lot more instant deaths in the level, and there's just new enemies that are significantly harder than what they were in the NES game. Take for example, this little flame here. It looks pretty easy, it's just a little flame that goes across the screen, but you have to time your jumps literally perfect in order to jump into this flame, and you have to keep jumping constantly back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until you can finally jump over the flame. And it's not that bad if you have a little bit of life to spare. If you have no life to spare, it is pretty much a guaranteed dying because you're not going to get through here without getting hit at least once. And of course, once you make it through one of them, you drop down a level, and what do you have again? You have another one. It's like they knew this was an incredibly difficult part and decided to put it back to back to back, just to sort of annoy the player a little bit. But outside of this, most of the enemies are pretty similar to what they were in Mega Man 1 Fireman stage until you get to the final boss, which is obviously still going to be Fireman, but holy cow is this an easy boss. All you have to do is stand in one place and shoot your Mega Buster and you will have him beat. I mean, it's just that simple. You don't have to worry about dodging, you don't have to worry about anything. You just simply stand there and you will end up killing him first just by basically shooting the Mega Buster over and over and over. No dodging required. Perhaps they saw how hard the level was and they just wanted to sort of give you an easy boss to finish the stage up. And if that's the case, I definitely appreciate it for the first level. Next up we have Cutman stage, and once again, this is pretty similar to the NES game. However, they added some new enemies in here, which are once again the hardest part of the stage. No, you don't get a little flame that shoots across the screen. Instead, you get these little sparks that come down. Sometimes the sparks leap, sometimes they just come straight at you, but they take a lot of hits to kill, and in a lot of cases, they're just difficult to avoid, and you end up having a lot of damage taken from them. But that's not the worst new enemy in the Cutman stage. The worst new enemy is just literally a pair of blades. A cut. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. And they come at you, and they don't start their little rotation until they get close enough to you. So you have to basically fake them out, get close to them, back away, and then they start doing this little circle move here. Once they do that circle move, you have to jump into the circle. You can't kill them. You jump into the circle, and then you have to jump out of the circle and hope that the next enemy is not another pair of scissors that's going to get you into a little trap of guaranteed to be hit here. Now, once again, if you have plenty of health, you can just sort of zoom through this. If you're low on health, this is pretty much a guaranteed death in this level. It is highly annoying, and once again, this level is incredibly long compared to the NES version. So many opportunities to die, so many opportunities to lose life. The game is just much more difficult in the platforming aspects of the Game Boy game. I don't know why they did it that way, because it's actually hard to control Mega Man a little bit compared to what he was on the NES, because it's zoomed in a little bit. But then when you get to Cutman, just simply pull out the Firestorm and you're going to have to beat in pretty much first try. They're continuing the trend of the bosses being super easy in these levels, but the levels themselves being incredibly hard. It's just a weird mashup for these Game Boy games. The next level is probably the only exception in the entire game as far as like a difficult level, and Electman's level is actually pretty simple if you're good at platforming. If you're difficult at platforming, yeah, it's still a pretty hard level because it does require very precise timing as far as like when to climb the ladders with electricity coming across and making some of these jumps just right. But if you're good at platforming, this one's not too bad. There's not a lot of opportunities for these unfair enemies that weren't in the NES game. And Electric Man continues the trend here of being an extremely easy boss. Overall, this is the stage that probably has the closest music and closest feel of the original NES game, and also closest difficulty at the same time. Next up we have Iceman stage, and once again it's a more difficult stage than the NES one, and they added in a few new little extra things to make it exciting for you. Now first off, you do get to keep some of the same enemies. You have these little grinning helicopter buddies that come down. I know it's not an actual grin, it's just what it looks like to me. You can take those guys out. You also have what I deem as the bacon shooters in this game. They're supposed to be boomerangs, but man, they just look like they're shooting out bacon in this game. I can't help it, it's what it looks like. And then they add in these ice puzzles, which are these little icicles that drop down, and you have to basically bait them out and jump on top of them in order to jump to other icicles. And I can't for the life of me to figure out how to time it just right where you're not going to get hit at least once in the process. And that's sort of the problem I have with this Game Boy game, is there's so many instances where it feels like you are meant to get hit in order to advance in these areas. And if you're low on health, it's just that you're guaranteed to die instead of progressing through the level. And I just don't really like levels that are designed to get hit in certain spots. But that's the way it feels, at least in a lot of these levels of Mega Man 1. But once again, Iceman, piece of cake if you can finally get there. The level itself is the hard part. And then of course you enter into Dr. Wily's castle here. And it's very similar as far as like the other games. You bring back all the core enemies throughout the levels, you know, some instant death traps, things like that. This is actually pretty similar to how most Dr. Wily castle levels are done. And at the close of the level, you do get to fight off 4 robot bosses back to back to back. But what's different here is instead of doing the same ones that you've already fought throughout the game, they bring in 4 bosses from Mega Man 2. So this is how it's like a combination of Mega Man 1 and Mega Man 2 on the NES. And so you fight Flash Man, Quick Man, Bubble Man, and Heat Man. How they chose just these 4, I don't know. And why they chose to just simply put them in here with no level, it's also sort of mind-boggling. But regardless, here they are, and you can also get their powers. And it's sort of pointless to get their powers, because you're not going to use these powers pretty much at all for the rest of the game. Because you only have 1 stage left, and none of these moves are required to beat either of those bosses. But speaking of the bosses, let's talk about one that is brand new to the game. That's our next one to fight. That is just an amazing villain, and I wish they'd done more of him inside the Mega Man series. His name is Inker, and he actually appears in Mega Man 10 later on and in some of the other Game Boy games, but he's basically just sort of a mirror character. He jumps at you and he runs off to the side, holds his sword up, and then you shoot at him. He absorbs whatever you shoot at him, and the more he absorbs, the more he can shoot back out at you. So you have to sort of make a strategy on how much you want to attack versus how much you think you can dodge. And then of course, once he shoots it back at you, he rushes off to the other side of the screen and the game continues. It's a neat little strategy that you have to develop here as far as like risk taking versus damage given versus how much skill you think you have on avoiding his attacks. It's a great boss battle, and it's probably one of the best in the entire game, if not one of the best in the entire Mega Man series. It's just a really fun, unique take on a traditional Mega Man boss. And once you beat him, you actually get his power, which allows you to reflect moves back from enemies. It's a cool little move to have. And then you move into the last stage of the game, which is going to be Dr. Wily's level himself. And this is the best music in the entire game. This stage here, I don't know why they saved the music for just this stage, because a lot of players may never get to experience it. But holy cow, this is a great Mega Man soundtrack song. And I don't think it's on any of the other games. Just listen to a little bit of the clip here. And when you finally get to the end of the stage, you do get to battle against Dr. Wily himself. He has a little mechanical vehicle you have to destroy. Pretty basic on the first stage, just stand right next to it and just fire away. You won't die, and you can just simply take out the entire first stage and lose like half your health. And in the second stage, all you gotta do is use the reflect move, avoid the little hand that comes down, and reflect the missiles back, and you'll have him beat in no time. This is actually a really easy final boss, but that being said, it's also one of the most fun bosses in the game. It keeps up that pace of easy bosses, but this one actually required some dodging, learning the mechanics, and it's just a fun boss battle. This is a great way to finish the game. And after this battle, of course, the credits begin to roll, and holy cow, these are some of the best credits of a Mega Man game once again. The graphics are fantastic. You actually get to see the enemies and pictures of the robot bosses, like the animated versions of them, not just some little pixelated, what they look like in the game, what they look like in the manual. It's probably some of the best animation of any of the Mega Man games 1 through 6 included in the game itself. It's really impressive what they did on the Game Boy. And I also love sort of the space scene as you're walking through the corridors here. And once again, they have some of the best closing music of any of the Mega Man games. It's amazing to me that some of the best music of any Mega Man games is hidden inside the first Game Boy game and in parts of the game that a lot of players will never even get to experience. Holy cow, these 2 songs at the close of the game are great. But overall, how does Dr. Wily's Revenge shape up with the rest of the Mega Man franchise? It's a bit of a mixed bag. First off, you do have some amazing songs on the soundtrack. too bad most players don't get to experience them, but they are amazing songs. You have some awesome new weapons that you get to use, that little reflect move, a great way to do it. You have that amazing boss that you get to remove from. You have a great final boss battle against Dr. Wily. There's some really awesome aspects of that. But outside of the end game, the core game itself is a little bit on the lackluster side. The levels themselves are way too long. They're way too difficult. They add in mechanics that were unnecessary and made the game a little bit more on the unfair side, as far as like instant dying and things like that. But then they made the bosses just laughably easy throughout the game. So there's not really like a happy medium here. Everything's either super easy or super hard, and the majority of players are not ever going to finish the game. It's one of the harder Mega Man games that I've come across, and not a difficulty that I would consider like a fair difficulty for most players either. But you also have to consider this is the first Mega Man on the Game Boy, and they were experimenting with it and figuring out what direction they wanted to go. And so I think when Sec Part 2, Part 3, and the rest of them come into play, it's only going to go up from here. So I'm excited to see what the rest of the Mega Man games on Game Boy have in store for us. And of course, we're going to review all of them here on this channel. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check out my other videos listed up above. As always, go out there, find a great game to play, and just simply have a great rest of the day.